Before we begin, if you enjoy stories that make you feel, remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps more people find these tales and keeps our little storytelling corner alive. Now, settle in and let your imagination do the walking. You won't believe what happened next. It all started on a day that seemed ordinary but changed everything. What you're about to hear is something no one ever forgot. The town of Sao Bento clung to the hillside like a stack of terracotta cups, each house painted the color of ripe fruit and splashed with sun. On summer afternoons, the jacaranda trees dusted the streets in purple confetti. It made the cobblestones look like they were dressed for a party, even when no party was planned. Children ran through the alleys shrieking with laughter. Women clinked teacups and leaned out of their windows to trade fresh gossip. And even the stray dogs seemed to wag their tails in rhythm with the church bell. At the far end of Rua do Alecrim, tucked behind a hedge of wild rosemary and a gate that squealed like a scolded bird, lived a woman who did not belong to the noise. People called her Dona Amelia, always with the Dona in front, as if the formality could soften her edges. She was 69 years old, though the deep map of her face had more to do with weather than with numbers. Her hair was the color of old parchment tied back in a practical knot. She did not talk to anyone. She did not even nod when the baker's boy raised his cap. If a child's ball bounced against her gate, she would not return it. If a little hand reached through the bars, she was known to tap it away with a broom. She did not always hear the hymns of the town. She had the kind of silence that wrapped around the bones. She cultivated it like others cultivate gardens. It was her shelter, her sharp little stone house with its shuttered windows and straight-back chairs. Inside was a shelf of books that had not been touched in years, a sewing machine whose needle had long since forgotten the rhythm of cloth, a blue music box that she kept in a drawer, and a picture frame turned face down. If anyone had asked what was in the picture, no one would have dared. No one dared ask her anything. She hated questions. She hated children. There I said it. The woman hated children. It wasn't the ordinary, light annoyance of a busy person. It was a tight-fisted hatred that made her jaw set when she heard a high laugh. She pretended it was because children were disorder because they were noise with legs. But that was only the cover story she told herself. Underneath, there was something else. There was something there, something that would change everything, if only it ever saw the sun. Nothing was supposed to change. Not that summer of the jacaranda confetti, not the sighing of the rosemary hedge, not the creak of the gate. But change, like a kite tugging at a string, sometimes arrives in a tug you cannot ignore. The new neighbors moved in on a Tuesday, rolling a painted bicycle and a chipped trunk up the lane. The mother was all thin wrists and fierce eyes, hair tucked under a scarf, laughing with the neighbor women as if she had been born laughing. And there was the boy, 8, maybe 9, whose presence was like the spark between flint and steel. He darted into the courtyard and spun in a circle, squinting at the sky. He had a front tooth missing and dirt under his nails, and a stubborn stripe of optimism crossing his face like sunlight under clouds. The mother called, "Lucas," and he shouted back, "I'm coming," even though he had no intention of doing so. The moment he noticed the gate with the squealing scold, his eyes lit with curiosity. It was inevitable. The first time his ball rolled against the rosemary hedge and thumped against Amelia's gate, she stood at the window and watched it rest there, warm and dumb in the afternoon glare. He came skidding around the corner, looked up with that wide-open face, and, without thinking, started to pull the gate. It sang out in protest. "Leave it," she said through the slats, voice flat. He paused. "Oh, sorry, I didn't know anybody lived there." "Someone does," she said, and she meant herself like an accusation. "Can I have my ball?" he asked, ready to smile his way out of anything. "No." He blinked as if this nonsense did not compute. "But it's mine." "You shouldn't let it roll where it doesn't belong," she said. "Nothing is guaranteed to come back to you in this world." The boy's eyebrows climbed. He looked at the ball, looked at the gate, looked at her. And then he did something that startled her more than a tantrum would have. He placed his small brown hands on the bars, peered into the darkness beyond, and said, conversationally, "Are you a witch?" "Out," she said, a disgust that disguised a flare of panic. "Now." He left, but what happened next, no one could have imagined, not even she, who thought she had imagined every possible inconvenience. That night when the town settled into its usual chorus, the church bell, the low murmurs from balconies, the radio playing a song from someone's kitchen, something slipped through the cat flap in Amelia's back door. If not for the dog she did not have, if not for the light she did not turn on, she might not have found the envelope on the kitchen floor. Inside was a crumpled drawing, a crooked house with a hedge, two uneven windows like squinting eyes, a gate that made the same sharp curve it made in real life. A stick figure stood alone in the window, a tight line for a mouth. Underneath, in laboriously large letters, was written, "To the lady who lives in the house, sorry I asked if you were a witch. Can I have my ball? From Lucas." Amelia stared at the drawing a long time as if it were a code and she might decipher it. Her mouth did a strange thing. It quivered. She took a long breath with the heartbreaking slowness of a person who has not sobbed in years, put the drawing back in the envelope, and without thinking tucked it into the blue music box's drawer. She did not open the music box. She did not return the ball. She went to bed and dreamed of hands. Small hands, sticky with jam, hands that tugged at her skirt. A name rose up to the ceiling and hung there, heavy, like a swollen cloud that would refuse to break. Clara. She woke with her heart pounding faster with every second, because even in the dream her body knew what her mind didn't want to remember. The fever, the frantic nights, the way the doctor had shaken his head without looking her in the face, the little white shoes that no longer had a body to fill them. After that, people whispered grief like it was contagious, and Joe, who could not stand to see a thing he could not fix, left a note on the table and went north for work and never came back. With Clara's frozen shoes and Joe's empty chair, her house had become a museum of before. Everything bright had become a splinter. She sealed the shutters and made a pact with herself. No more. No more talking, no more noise, no more children. The town could hum without her. The sun rose, as it always does, indifferent to who has promised what in the night. Someone sang along with the radio next door. She washed a teacup that no one had used. It rang against the sink like a bell. A soft rustle pulled her to the window. There, crouched by the rosemary hedge, Lucas whispered to an ant. "I'm telling you, sir," he said, face solemn, "if you go that way, there's a puddle. You'll drown." He pivoted as if a conductor before an insect orchestra and looked up to the window. He saw her, and instead of flinching, he raised a hand as if tipping an invisible hat. She snorted despite herself, and hated the warmth that tried to climb into her throat. Later that afternoon, when the heat made the street feel like an oven, she saw him again. This time he had a kite, bamboo sticks held together by tape, newspaper with a painted dragon face. He tried to lift it with a sprint. It trembled, lifted, then nosedived into her garden, landing with a flurry of rosemary and dust. "No, no, no," he said, flumping to his knees. He tugged at the string. It had snagged on a thorn. He tugged harder, his face red. "Stop pulling," she said from behind him, startling him so badly he fell into the hedge. "You'll make it worse." He sat up and squinted at her. "Can you help?" She opened the gate just enough to slide her hand through. He watched as she twisted the string slowly, carefully, as hands remembered old knots from old times. The string came free. She almost closed the gate, but something stopped her. She extended the kite he had made. He grinned like sunrise. "Thanks." "Don't say thanks if you didn't mean it," she muttered, defensive even against gratitude. "Oh, I meant it," he said, jumping to his feet, clutching his dragon. "I mean it lots, you're good with knots." She flinched. It was such a small thing, a passing observation. Still, it lit a fuse in some dusty corner of her. She used to help Clara tie the laces on those white shoes. She used to tie ribbons. She used to. "Don't climb the fig tree," she said without warning, gesturing towards the gnarled tree that leaned over the corner of the wall, as if caught mid-bow. Why not? Lucas asked. Innocence not as an act but as a condition. It's old, she said, as if that explained everything. So are you. She hummed. She could have slammed the gate. She could have delivered a speech about respect. Instead, she said, dry, and if you fall and crack your skull, your mother will blame me. She won't, he said, confident in the cosmic fairness of the world. Mama's nice. Nice people still get scared, she said before she could stop herself. But Lucas was not listening. He was already testing the low branches with hands that trusted wood and luck. Her stern warning lasted 2 minutes. Then he slipped, his foot went out from under him, and he dangled, the dragon kite crushed under his stomach, his breath coming in panicked puffs like a bird beating against glass. Her heart slammed once, twice, and then she was moving without thinking. Hold still, she barked, her voice the voice of someone who, long ago, had shouted to a child with her whole chest. She slipped through the gate and reached up, hands steady because they knew what came next mattered. She gripped his calf, guided his foot to a better branch. Let go, I have you. I can't, he squeaked, fingers white around the bark. Lucas, she said, and the name felt like stepping onto foreign soil. It grounded him. He breathed, he obeyed, he let go. She took his weight. They toppled into a heap that smelled of crushed green and dust. He shook. She did too, quietly in the private place under her bones. Are you okay? He asked absurdly, and she barked out an unwilling laugh. You are the one who almost fell out of a tree, and you ask me. I've done it before, he said with a pride that made her want to box his ears. Not here, back in the other place. You must promise me you won't climb alone, she said, and her voice was raw as a scraped knee. Okay, he said easily, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. I promise, if you show me how to be better with knots. He wore his bargains on his sleeve. She should have said no. She should have slammed the gate and made another promise to herself, to the shadows, that she would not do this, not again, not ever. But what came out was, the knots are for keeping things together. He nodded solemnly, like people. She hesitated, sometimes. Okay, he said, tomorrow. She jerked her chin in a gesture that meant nothing and everything. Tomorrow. But what came the next day was not a quiet lesson in a quiet garden. It was a small domestic catastrophe. The kettle shrieked, she reached to lift it, her finger caught on the lid, and she yelped as steam bit. She said something sharp and old. When Lucas appeared in the gate with his dragon folded under his arm, he stopped mid-step. Are you okay? Fine, she snapped, because pain only made her more herself. He looked around like he knew what to look for. He grabbed a tea towel off the rack and moved to wrap her hand with a gentleness that forced her to hold still. It wasn't just the touch. She had not allowed anyone to touch her skin for so long that it felt like a foreign language. It was the audacity, the assumption that he could care for her. He peered up at her. My mama says cold water, not ice. Ice is bad. It shocks the skin. Here. He ran the tap, guided her hand under the stream. His brow furrowed in concentration. There. Warmth that had nothing to do with the water rose in her throat. She could not bear it. Don't climb the fig tree, she said again, because she had nothing better. He grinned. We have our deal. Their days began to stitch to one another as neatly as the hem she used to sew. They met at the gate, then inside it, then at the kitchen table where the light fell like honey and the rosemary brushed the sills with their smell. He brought pebbles with stripes, letters from school he didn't understand. A feather he claimed was from a falcon but clearly was. She showed him how to tie bowlines and square knots and how to wind string around 2 fingers so it wouldn't tangle. She boiled jam with him and handed him a wooden spoon, and when he giggled at the sticky bubble that popped on his cheek, she didn't scold. She reached, thumbed the smear away, and felt time fold oddly under her hands, the present slipping over the past like 2 palms touching through a veil. There was something there, a flicker, a thread, something that would change everything. Why don't you talk to anyone? He asked one day, peeling a mandarin at her table, spraying the peel with a burst of oil that smelled like an entire summer in a little mist. You're nice. "I'm not nice," she said. She should have laughed at the absurdity but found she could not. "And people don't need me." "I need you," he said, as simple as a fact. She looked at him and had to look away. The face-down frame on the shelf pressed against her like a hot coal. She could see the edges of the picture as if through her lids. She rose, crossed the room, and flipped it over with sudden anger. There, herself as a young woman, hair loose, eyes startled by joy, and in her arms a little girl whose smile was a piece of the sun. Clara's cheeks were soft as mango. In the far right background, a man leaned in, half cut off by the frame, his hand outstretched as if unable to decide whether to be part of the picture or apart from it. "Who is that?" Lucas asked, quieted by the gravity of her movements. "My daughter," she said, and the word landed so heavily the room seemed to tilt. He waited, hands in his lap, the Mandarin forgotten. "She got sick," Amelia said. "She didn't get better." "Oh," he said, and because he didn't have adult nonsense like platitudes or avoidance in his bag of tricks, he said the only true thing there was. "I'm sorry." Amelia swallowed. The music box ticked in the drawer as if a beetle had been caught inside. She opened it with a trembling finger. The lid lifted, and for the first time in decades the little ballerina turned slowly, a small thing spinning in a big world. The melody rose, fragile as cobwebs. She took the folded envelope from beneath the ballerina's feet and handed the drawing to Lucas. He beamed. "You kept it." "I don't know why," she lied. He nodded like he had just learned a secret handshake. "Okay, I'll bring more." More came. Drawings piled up on her table, dragons, boats, a woman with sharp eyebrows and a heart drawn onto her sweater because he didn't know how else to show that hers was there. She taped some to her icebox. She resented the way they made the room look like a place where a child lived. She resented it and fed it and could not stop. It did not go unnoticed. The town noticed everything, as towns do. People began to say things like, "Did you see? The witch smiled. She bought flour and sugar. She's baking. She asked how my father's leg was." "She didn't," said the baker's wife, scandalized and delighted. "She did." But what happened next, no one could have imagined. Marina, the mother with the fierce eyes, stood in Amelia's doorway one evening when the sky had gone the color of bruised plums. She had a dish towel on her shoulder and a face full of reluctance. "Boitard," she said politely out of habit, even though she now had cause to be angry. "Lucas." "In the kitchen," said Amelia, and only later did she realize this was the first time she had allowed her home to sound like someone else's home. Lucas trotted in, hair damp from washing. Marina's gaze flicked from him to the jam stains on the table, to the drawings, to the music box on the shelf. "Me," Lucas said, misreading the tightness around his mother's mouth as an ordinary sadness. "We made jam. It's the best jam in the world. Better than the man's jam at the market. I swear." "You should not be in this house," Marina snapped, the words out before she could soften them. Lucas went still. The jam jar he was holding thunked down heavily onto the table. He looked between the women like a bird that had smacked into a window and was trying to understand glass. His lower lip wobbled. "In my defense," Amelia said, stung, "I told him not to climb the fig tree and he didn't." "Oh good, because that's the point," Marina said, sarcasm like a blade. "Strangers teaching my son to disobey his mother." "Do not call me a stranger in my house," Amelia said, and the old shape of her anger slid into place like a cloak she had once worn daily. "He came. He knocked. He asked." "That's what children do. It is my job to tell him where he cannot go. It is my job to keep him from falling out of trees when you are not looking," Amelia said, and then they both seemed startled by what had been admitted, by the fact of the almost fall they had both feared for different reasons. Silence spun between them, tight as a fiddle string. Lucas stood with his chest heaving, eyes dragging like a magnet from his mother to his neighbor. He was a child, but even he understood that something larger than jam was being weighed. "Lucas," Marina said in a voice that scraped, because she was scared and because scared made her sound like angry. Home. He looked at Amelia as if asking permission. One corner of her mouth clenched. She nodded. He went. That night the house remembered how to be empty. The drawings on the icebox looked like flags planted by a conquering army in a land that had been taken back. The music box's silence was so loud it ached. Amelia did what she did best when hurt. She shut the shutters and washed dishes with a furious quiet, scrubbing until the glaze threatened to come off the plates. She told herself it was better this way. She had almost forgotten what it was like to not lose. She had almost remembered how to hope. Well, that was dangerous. She would tighten her grip, she would be careful, she would not make mistakes again. The next day her gate did not creak. The day after that, the rosemary hedge seemed to sulk. On the third day, the envelope appeared through the cat flap. Dear Donna Amelia, Mama says I can't come because she is worried. Sometimes she worries a lot. I think it is because the world is big. I'm not mad at her. I am a little sad. I am also a little mad. I am writing very honest. Please do not tell her. I promise not to climb the fig tree without you. I promise to say sorry. Can we still be friends? I drew you a dragon. I think it looks like you mean but not mean. I have to go now. From Lucas. Inside was a dragon with a crooked smile. She pressed the paper, closed her eyes. Her heart pounded faster with every second. In that moment, she realized there was no turning back. Not from feeling this, not from knowing this particular boy had left a handprint on the wall of her heart that no scrubbing would erase. She wrote back. Her handwriting startled her with its neatness, as if a younger version of herself had stepped into her hand to make the letters even. Dear Lucas, thank you for the dragon. Tell your mother I am very scary. But jam is less scary when eaten with bread. Not alone, not on your fingers, not on the floor. We can write. You are allowed to write. I will not tell her unless you promise to tell her yourself. Friends, listen. Friends are not fig trees. From A. Duart. They exchanged letters for a week, then two. Words snuck through the cat flap like contraband. He wrote about school, about a teacher who always wore green as if it were a magic shield, about a boy named Tito who tried to steal his pencil and was deeply disappointed to learn pencils could be taken and replaced easily, about the dog with the crooked ear who followed him 3 blocks as if they had been friends in a past life. She wrote about recipes, about knots, about the way the clouds sometimes looked like enormous ships, and it made her want to stand on the roof and raise a flag. But what happened next, no one could have imagined. One night the sky ripped open with rain so sudden the streets became streams. The jacaranda blossoms turned to pulp. The electricity snapped off. In houses up and down the street, candles flickered. Shadows leaped like dancers against the walls. The wind howled as if the night had lost its temper. A small figure appeared at her door, hair plastered to his head, eyes huge. He knocked so softly she almost missed it. She opened the door. Lucas. His teeth chattered. Mama's stuck at work. The bus stopped. She said to stay with Mrs. Silva, but Mrs. Silva's house flooded in the last rain and she was crying and I didn't know what to do and the thunder is, and I came here. She drew him in without thinking, gathered him in the oldest gesture there is. Someone is small and your arms become shelter. She wrapped him in a blanket that smelled like cedar. She made cocoa. She put the kettle on and ignored the pain in her finger because sometimes pain does not matter. Sometimes only the living do. He sat on the floor, feet tucked under him, clutching the mug like it was a dragon egg. Lightning flared and he flinched. The thunder rolled over the hill and into the kitchen, and he squeezed his eyes shut. What did you imagine thunder was when you were little? She asked. I'm little now, he said, indignant, which made her smile. When I was little, she said, I thought the sky had a belly and the belly was hungry. It rumbled. He peeked. What does it eat? Clouds and bad dreams. He considered that, the crease between his brows slowly smoothing. Can it eat fear? It can try, she said, but fear is stubborn. It hides in corners. Thunder rumbled like heavy furniture being dragged across a floor. He scooted closer to her ankle. She did not move it away. They sat, each listening to the storm with their own old reasons to hate it. "Tell me about your daughter," Lucas said, simple and impossible. He asked like someone who believed that stories were ladders out of pits, that if you had the right one, you could climb to a place where the air was sweet. She tried to say no. She tried to change the subject. But the story had been captive for so long that it wanted to be told, and the night was too loud for silence anyway. She told him about Clara's obsession with buttons, about the way she would sit under the table and sort them into bowls by color, inventing a world where yellow and blue were cousins and red was a king. She told him about the way Clara would tilt her head when listening to the clock, and when it chimed, she'd say, "That was a good sound, Mama. That one had a nice ending." She told him about the fever. She did not mention the emptiness after. She did not have to. It sat with them. It had always sat with her. "My friend Joe's grandpa died," Lucas said softly, and realized what he had said only after he had said it. "I mean, died is different. But we went to the house and everyone brought food and the aunties cried and then laughed and then cried again and it was loud and messy. Maybe you needed a noisy house." "I had the opposite," she said. "I had silence like an ocean where no one remembered to teach you how to swim." "I can teach you how to swim," he offered, so seriously that she laughed through a tear in her voice. "In Coco?" she asked, and he giggled so hard he snorted and the storm was smaller for a heartbeat. In that moment she realized there was no turning back, not from loving him, not from being changed. The key scraped in the lock and the front door flew open, a figure staggering in with rain and worry. "Lucas!" Marina cried, panic ripping through her voice like something you could touch. "Meu Deus, Lucas!" "Here," he said from the kitchen. He stood, the blanket falling like a cape. "I'm okay, Mama." Marina darted to him, touching his face, his hair, his shoulders as if making sure all his pieces had come through the storm. Then she noticed Amalia, cocoa in hand, hair askew, eyes luminous with too much past and too much present. The two women froze, the storm roaring around them as if the weather were taking sides. "I told him to go to Mrs. Silva's," Marina said, breathless and angry and grateful and everything that fear makes you. "I told him." "He tried," Amalia said flatly. "There was water in her kitchen. He came here. He was scared." "You're not," Marina began and stopped herself. "Not family, not a friend, not safe, not known," she swallowed. "Thank you, I mean thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," Amalia said. And then because she understood, because in the sound of that mother's voice she heard something like the echo of her own long ago, she added, "But you can owe me honesty." Marina blinked. "What?" "If we are going to pretend we don't know each other, let's at least be clear about it," Amalia said dryly and then awkwardly. "Or you can come in for Coco." Marina looked at her son. Lucas nodded with such earnestness it was comical. She stepped in. The three of them stood in the kitchen with the storm tightening and untying itself in the windows. They talked. They talked like people who had been holding their breath and finally found a pocket of air. Marina told Amalia about the job at the laundry, the buses that missed stops in the rain, the savings jar under the sink, the promises she made to herself in bed at night when she could not sleep because fear sat with her like a second shadow. Amalia told her about silence. She told her about the stupid decisions you can make when you confuse self-protection with self-destruction. She told her about Clara, and Marina's face changed, softened like clay under water. "Dona Amalia," Marina said at last, the title turning willingly respectful instead of resentfully formal. "My son has a way with people. He has a way of dragging you into the deep end before you realize you don't know how to swim. I should have knocked sooner. You have a way of being brave even when you are terrified," Amalia said, surprising herself with compassion. "You noticed," Marina said, a small laugh breaking through like sun. "Fine, maybe you can be part of his circle, but no fig tree." "No fig tree," they said together. And Lucas, delighted by the rhythm of a chord, clapped very softly as if he were afraid to frighten it away. Life changed after that, quietly at first, then loudly. The town festival unfurled like a ribbon across the square, colored paper lanterns. A flatbed truck turned into a stage, a dozen grills exhaling smoke big enough to call a cloud by its first name. Children ran with kites. Old men played cards at tables that had been pulled into the street, as if they had been playing since the warm-blooded beginning of the world. A band fiddled something nobody knew and everyone knew simultaneously. Marinades spilled their secrets. Gossip perched on every shoulder like a parrot. Lucas and Amelia built a proper dragon kite one afternoon in the kitchen. It was a project. It was a dare. It was a touchstone. They measured silk with the precision of surgeons, stuck bamboo rods with glue that stung up into their nostrils and made them lightheaded with happiness. Lucas painted scales with a hand that had not yet learned to be ashamed of its own delight. When it dried, they stood in the yard with the kite between them and the sky above them in its enormous blue shirt, and they looked at each other as if to say, "Ready." Marina tied a ribbon to the tail. "For luck," she said. "Luck is what people call it when work meets timing," Amelia said crisply, a scientist again for a moment. "Okay, lady who keeps luck in a jar," Lucas laughed. "Let's go." They ran. The dragon pulled, uncertain then certain. The wind caught, the line thrummed. The kite rose, shook like a dog off water, and then it soared. The dragon's eye winked. It became a thing that knew the sky. Neighbors stared. The band stuttered, then rallied. Someone clapped. Someone else whispered, "It can't be," as if a miracle had come in through the wrong door. There she was, the woman who had spent years refusing to talk to anyone, who hated children, sprinting across the square with her gray hair in disarray and a boy beside her as if they had been running together for a decade. She laughed. It came out rusty, like a hinge that had been oiled after a long time. It made the hair on people's arms rise. No one could have imagined it. The way a laugh can take a body apart and put it back together better. The dragon tilted, dived, rose. The string burned a line across their palms. "Let it go a little," she shouted. "Give it more room." "I'm trying," Lucas crowed. His eyes were bright beyond belief. In that moment she realized there was no turning back. The words did not occur to her in any sentence. They occurred in her marrow. She was someone's person again. It was terrifying. It was like standing under a sky that could do anything and was doing exactly this. The town noticed. In the days that followed, children who had been dragged away from her gate by their ears began to caper past it on purpose. Mothers stopped to chat. The baker gave her the crusty end of a loaf she liked and did not charge her. The street seemed to tilt a degree warmer when she stepped onto it. Errands knitted into conversations. She found herself nodding to someone she didn't know and meaning it. This was, she had to admit to herself, not entirely awful. She opened her window on Wednesdays and Thursdays and put the book she had not touched in years on the sill with a hand-lettered sign. "Borrow a book. Bring it back if you want to talk about it." At first, only 3 children came, Lucas holding both hands and dragging 2 friends like one boy pulling 2 heavy dreams. Then 5, then 11. They sat on her stoop and listened to her voice shape words in the air into something that felt like shared spellwork. She discovered that stories were knots too, the kind that didn't pull tight around your throat but rather tied the lost to the found. But what happened next, no one could have imagined. She would say at the end of a chapter, closing the book with drama, and the children would groan because she had left them dangling, deliciously. She made everything end with a small cliff, a curl of the finger, a promise that if they came back tomorrow, they would be pulled up onto the ledge together. One afternoon, a kite skittered down the street with no boy attached, a runaway. It smacked against her kneecap, flapped, clung to her calf like an orphan. She bent to free it and saw, at the far edge of the lane, an ear she knew, crooked as if someone had squeezed it while it was still new. "Ringo," Lucas shouted. The dog's name, he had informed everyone, was Ringo because of the circle of white around his eye. Ringo paid no attention to his own name, as always. He was chasing a butterfly with the single-minded attention of a scholar tracking a thought. He darted past Mrs. Silva's steps, past the fire hydrant, past the end of the street, and into the scrub that led to the old quarry, a place that had cut stone and then cut ankles, a place mothers warned children about with variations of the same story. Not there, Lucas shouted, sprinting, kite forgotten. He looked at Amelia just once, as if to ask whether she had room in her courage for more. She did not think, she ran. Lucas, Marina screamed, somewhere behind, stumbling out of her doorway with a dish towel still wrapped around her hand. Lucas, stop. He did not stop. The world narrowed to a boy's back and a dog's tail, and the edge of safety rushing at them like someone slid the horizon forward on a string. The quarry yawned, the lip of stone, the lashed-together fence half fallen under years of children who tested warnings with their teeth. Ringo squeezed through. Lucas attempted to follow. The fence bit his shirt. He wriggled free. No, Amelia shouted and grabbed air. There are moments when life shrugs off its disguise and throws itself at you. Her heart slammed. Her breathing became the whole world. The sun beat on her skull. Time broke apart into 1,000 bright pieces. He reached the edge, skidded. The gravel moved under his shoes. The earth did not want him. He windmilled, and then his knee hit a rock and he pitched forward and caught himself on a scrubby bush, body hanging out over the drop, one foot scrabbling behind him. Ringo, as only dogs can do, turned and cocked his head. Like this was an interesting development in a day already rich with diversity. "Do not move," Amelia said, the words low and delicious with sheer authority. "Mama," Lucas cried, voice small and round as if he were 4 again. "I'm coming," Amelia said, and found that she believed it. She looked around. The fence's remains lay half-coiled on the ground, wire like a lasso. The line between her fingers felt like a memory, knots. She wrapped the wire around a stunted tree, hands deft. She tied a bowline. She looped it around her waist because she knew she had always known that no one else was going to save him. Not the sky, not luck, not regret. Her muscles trembled. "Hold on." "Donna," Marina panted, arriving with a face contorted by a mother's particular terror. She grabbed the other end of the wire without being told. She dug her heels in. Amelia lowered herself. The rock face shrugged flakes. Dust got into her throat. She coughed, then bit it back. "Lucas," she murmured, as if to a skittish animal, "look at me." He did. His eyes were so big that if you looked too long you could fall into them. "I've got you," she said, and it was the truth. She flattened herself, the wire around her waist singing, a high, thin song as if the whole hillside were an instrument being plucked. She reached. He could not let go of the bush to reach for her. He would fall. She had to go further. Her ribs scraped rock. Pain is like a bell. She ignored it. "Count to 3, she said. "Not fast. 1. 1, he muttered, tears mixing with snot. 2, she said. 2. 3. He loosened one hand on the bush and slapped it into hers. His fingers were sticky with sap. She grabbed. She hauled. He cried out. He was small. He was heavy. She was older than she once was. Marina's voice rose in a sound that was neither human nor animal and pulled the wire tight. The world seemed to balance on the edge of a knife. For a strange, suspended moment, it did not choose. Then it chose. Their combined weight shifted. Amelia dragged him upward, cried out as something in her ankle went. She did not care. He scrabbled his knees and then his hips over the lip, and then he was on the ground and she was not, and then she was too. They lay there panting, the dog joyfully licking Lucas's ear as if this were all a game he had won. Marina fell to her knees and pulled her son to her, her breath in ragged pieces. "You," she said, to the dog, to the boy, to the universe. "Don't you ever," she couldn't finish. She ran out of air. She looked at Amelia and her face collapsed into gratitude that made it hard to look at her. "Thank you," she whispered, hoarse, which in a better world would be unnecessary, but in this one mattered. Amelia closed her eyes. The pain in her ankle made itself a little home. She imagined the bone there with surprise on its face, then getting to work. It was hard to breathe around the throb. It was also hard to stop laughing, the hysterical laugh of someone who had just been returned suddenly to a life they were not finished with. She pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. The scrub pressed scratchy and real under her palm. The sky, indifferent and bright, looked down. "Ambulance," someone said. The town backfilled the scene suddenly, as if it had been standing just out of frame, ready. People pulled. People offered hands and handkerchiefs and opinions. The old quarry, which had been a place of caution, shrank back to its old shape, a hole that could not swallow a miracle. The siren wailed. Ringo leaped at it, thrilled. At the hospital, the doctor scolded her gently about bones that were not as stubborn as they used to be. Marina sat in a plastic chair with her hands folded like prayer, and cried so quietly you could believe she was just bending over to look at a stain on the floor. Lucas perched on the edge of the bed, fiddling with the strap of her walking boot, which had become part of her like a new joke. "Are you okay?" he asked for the 1,000th time. "I am not excellent," she admitted, and he grinned because she could be funny even now. "What would I have done without you?" he asked, seriously suddenly, and the question was too big. "You would have clung to that ridiculous bush, and you would have been pulled up by your mother and 8 townspeople and a dog," she said. "And you would have gone home and been grounded until you were 20, and you would not have had a grandmother friend to play games with tomorrow. Which is to say, we are both necessary." He put his hand on her arm, small and warm. "You are my grandmother friend." She felt something in her chest that had been a hard stone dissolve into water. She nodded, because if she said anything she would weep, and she did not like to cry in front of people who did not know how to leave her alone with it. Marina leaned forward, took her hand. "Thank you," she said again. "I will say it until the words burn holes in my mouth if I have to." "You're welcome," Amelia said simply, and then added because she could. "But you owe me a carton of eggs. I broke 4 this morning in the jam." Marina laughed so loudly the nurse peeked around the curtain to check if this was a problem. It was. It was the opposite. Summer slid into early autumn. The jacaranda blossoms dried and fell away, and the streets wore a new coat made of wind. On Saturdays, children gathered in a circle on the stones in front of Amelia's house. A rug rolled out like a stage. Cushions that had not seen light for a decade dragged onto the stoop. Someone chalked stars around the edges. Lucas leaned against her leg like a cat. Ringo slept with one ear open, ready to play hero again if the opportunity presented itself. She told stories. She did not read them. She told them, as in, she took them in her hands and turned them around and let them become what they wanted to be in front of the listeners. She told of a girl who could tell what time it was by the way the wind smelled, and of a baker whose bread rose with songs, and of an old woman who thought she was a rock until a boy knocked, and she discovered she could be a river without drowning in her own flood. "But what happened next, no one could have imagined," she would say, letting the line hang like a lantern down a dark hall, and the children would flatten their palms against the stones, quieting the world with their attention. She saw herself in them, saw her own childhood face, the round and eager, the serious. She saw Clara's hands in the way one little girl smoothed a skirt. She saw Joe's shadow in the face of a man who bent over to tie his daughter's shoe and patted her hair without thinking. She felt the ache and the gratitude both, heavy as a fruit and light as a leaf. People asked her sometimes, haltingly, because they were accustomed to her old edges and were not yet steady on their feet around her new ones. How did it change? What happened? It was not polite to ask such things, which made the asking necessary. She would smile and say, "A boy lost his ball against my gate." It was true and not true both. On quiet evenings when the town took off its day and hung it on the back of the chair, she and Lucas would play jacks with walnuts, or draw hopscotch boxes and jump them in order until they were breathless and end up lying on their backs on the warm stones looking at the sky through the rosemary. "That one looks like a dragon," he would say, pointing at a cloud. "And that one looks like you pretending to be angry." She would pretend not to poke him with her toe. "Are you happy?" he asked once sideways. It was the kind of question adults avoid because they are afraid of the answer. She took her time. The sky was vast. She counted the swallows. She measured the air. "Yes," she said, and it was simple and enormous, the way yesies sometimes are. "How come?" "Because I get to play," she said. "Because I get to teach. Because my house is full of the wrong socks and the wrong shoes and the right noise. Because, because even old people can be children and be happy. He grinned, missing tooth shining like a small crescent moon. I knew it. I turned you into a kid. You merely reminded me how, she said. The town changed with her. Not dramatically. A town never becomes something it wasn't, but in degrees that meant something for who you chose to be when you woke up. Mrs. Silva's kitchen got repaired with a fundraiser organized by teenagers who had seen rescue happen and wanted to be part of the brand of saving that had no uniforms. The baker started letting kids knead dough and pretend they were sculptors. The church opened its doors to a music class where 3 generations learned to play the same clumsy chords and somehow sounded like Hope doing scales. The library, which had been dusty, suddenly discovered a story hour needed a whole new set of cushions. People used to say with a shrug about Amelia, she set. The kind of set you mean when you place a glass on a table and know it will not move even if the table shakes. Later, they would say with a little smile, she learned how to dance in place. There is a difference. On the last night before winter slipped its cold fingers under doors for real, the town stretched a long rope of lights across the square. It felt like stars you could pull with your hands. The days were short. The people were long with each other. The band played a carol with a beat you could snap with your teeth, and Lucas, taller now by a finger length and missing a different tooth, tugged at Amelia's sleeve. Dance. Don't be ridiculous, she said, sitting straighter. He tugged again, please. She rose. They didn't dance in any way that could be recognized by dancers, but it counted. They swayed and laughed and tried to mirror each other like 2 people learning a word in 2 languages at the same time. Marina watched, a smile on her mouth that had nothing to do with guilt or fear. The town hummed under the lights. Ringo wolfed down a dropped sausage and found nirvana. Later, when the square was almost empty and the night had put the lamps on dim, Lucas leaned against her, heavy with sleepy. What's the lesson? He mumbled. He loved lessons if they came in the form of stories. He loved them less if they came in the form of scoldings. He liked to pretend there were no differences between them. The lesson, she said. Every story is like a walk. At the end you tell me where we were going, he said. Logic of children like the golden octagons of certain kinds of bees. She thought she could say any of 1,000 things. She could say, we are not what grief makes us. She could say, you can love again without losing who you loved before. She could say, even stubborn old women built from stones and burned bread can be rivers. She could say the easy thing or the hard thing or the thing that felt like breathing. She cupped his head with its cowlicks and its secrets. That sometimes, she said slowly, the people we are most afraid of are the stories we haven't read yet. And sometimes the person who knocks on the door is the chapter that changes the book. He yawned. That sounds like a teacher thing. Old habits, she said, amused. Try this instead. Even the old can be children and happy. That's the lesson. He smiled into her sweater. I know. As the lights rocked gently in the breeze above them, and the rosemary breathed that evergreen breath, and the town held itself like a family that has learned how to fight and how to forgive. Her heart beat, steady, insistent, no longer afraid of being heard. But what happened next, you ask? Life. It went on. They had jam that burned once and made a funny taste everyone loved anyway. They had a kite that got stuck on the church tower and played a slender song in the wind for an entire week until the priest retrieved it with a very long pole, laughing in a way his collar did not forbid. They had mornings when the sky was mean and evenings when laughter fell like the jacaranda blossoms used to fall. And on a day that seemed ordinary but changed everything, she stood at her window and saw a boy she did not know crouch to whisper advice to an ant and raise his hand to the house with the rosemary hedge, and she waved back. This is how we make a world, with the small yesies that add up to a life. If you stayed until the end, if you felt something open like a small blue door in your chest, you already know this. The story you are afraid to live is waiting to climb your fence and knock. Open. Let it in. Be ready to run with your dragon across the square and laugh when the string burns your palm, because you will not drop it this time. Not this life, not this heart. And if you liked it, well, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, come back for more. We will make other ordinary days become everything.